Chapter 16. Kaci adjusted the loose dress Seer had given her, pulling it back on her shoulders so that her breasts didn't completely spill out from the top of the wide V-neck. "This dress is huge." When she glanced up, he was watching her, his mouth open. "He looks as if he wants to devour me whole." Her inner muscles tightened at just the thought. He cleared his throat, his voice husky.
"Our women are quite a bit larger than you."
She perked up, glad to have an excuse to ask him more questions. "Do they have tattoos like you?"
"Tattoos?"
He frowned. "The black shapes on your body,"
"Oh, my markings."
he said, touching one that curled along his massive bicep.
"Yes, our females have markings as well."
Do your men find our women attractive without the marks?" He stared.
"I thought after last night that would be painfully clear."
Her pace sped up as the night before came rushing back to her. Touching him had been better than any fantasy, and feeling his hands on her, his mouth on her, it made her want more of him, all of him. Focus, ask questions. I'll never gain his trust if I don't get to know him, which means I won't be able to convince him not to give me away to some strange guy named Parsimon. Whether I ultimately decide to stay with Seer or go back home, I'm better off with him than someone else. The thought caught her oddly by surprise. Was she really already so smitten with this alien that she'd consider staying with him rather than going home? For some reason, the idea that she could wake up tomorrow and not see him again made her stomach turn. I'll be damned if I allow them to sell me to some alien jerk. I'm staying with Seer, then I'll choose my own fate. Is that why your people came for us? Because they find us attractive?
"No.
He hesitated.
The rewire contagion that made you ill wiped out most of our female population before we found a cure, and we haven't found too many planets where we are compatible with the female population."
Oh! What more could she say? So exposing us to that same virus was accidental? Somehow she knew the answer, but she needed to hear it.
"Entirely."
She had only a moment to feel relieved before he continued.
"Part of the reason I've kept you in my private medical bay is because we can't risk exposing the other women to you."
The other women. She realized that she hadn't thought about them since she'd been with Seer. Guilt blossomed within her chest, and her thoughts turned to them as he finished clearing their meal from the table. While I've been here enjoying life, what have Catalina and my squad had to endure? Have the other aliens been as kind to the other women as Seer has been to me? Since the crash, her thoughts had been fuzzy. Everything had seemed so perfect. She wasn't dead in some terrible mission to defend Earth. Her sister was safe, and her virus actually had a cure. And then there was the sexy, sweet doctor responsible for healing her. I've been so grateful to not be consumed by my sickness, to finally be able to enjoy my life a little, that I didn't think of the others. I'm an ass. She raised her chin. When I leave this room, I'm heading straight for them. If they aren't being treated well, everything will change. Seer will become my enemy, and my goal will be to get us all the hell out of here. I really hope my friends are safe, and that Seer has been honest with me.
"One moment and we can leave,"
he said, drawing her attention from her thoughts as he moved away from the clean table.
"I know you are eager to go."
He turned his back to her. In one quick movement, he pulled his white shirt over his head and tossed it on the floor. The muscles on his back rippled with the action, and his markings shifted. Unable to help herself, she watched as he pressed a button on the wall and a drawer slid open. Reaching into it, he pulled out something. A second later, he donned a tan leather vest, which he buttoned with agile fingers, then slid one dagger after another into the built-in sheaths across his chest. "That doesn't look like something a doctor would wear," she remarked, feeling a flutter of nervousness. If she'd thought Seer looked handsome before, now, between his long blonde hair and the markings curling along his muscular flesh, he looked sexy, dangerous.
I was a medic in a war.
He turned back to her, wearing the vest, dark pants, and boots.
Even though it feels like a lifetime ago, my combat experience is as much a part of me as being a healer.
That's unexpected. Somehow, she couldn't imagine him fighting in a war. She moved closer to him, as if pulled by an invisible force, stopping just feet in front of him. And you think you might need weapons when we explore the ship?
No,
He reached out as if to touch her, then dropped his hands.
but I wouldn't gamble with your life.
His reassurance brought a smile to her lips. You're sweet. The markings on his face swirled. Something she'd come to realize meant he was embarrassed.
Let's go.
Padding on bare feet, he hadn't been able to find any shoes small enough for her. They left his room and exited the medical bay. When they reached the hallway, two alien men who stood conversing paused in their conversation to stare at her. Their gazes lingered on her before they walked past and entered a room just a couple doors down from their own. She stared at them. They were nearly as large as Seer, and the kind of men who would make her do a double take had they walked by her back on Earth. But for some reason, she didn't feel the same kind of overwhelming attraction she felt with Seer. It shouldn't have surprised her, but it did.
What would you like to see first?
This is it. I want to see the other women, my squad. A frown pulled the corners of Seer's lips down.
You can't.
Her hands curled into fists. I need to,
Why?
he asked, defiance in his gaze. She raised her chin. Some of them are my friends. I need to know they're safe. He stared at her for a long moment before his eyes gentled.
We can't risk exposing them to the virus, not when we aren't entirely sure you're cured yet.
I will not. He held up a hand to silence her.
I may be able to find a way for you to see them and speak to them without risking their health.
The fight left her. Thank you. They headed down the hall, his hand lingering lightly on her lower back. Heat radiated from his touch, but his gaze was sharp, alert. Tension seemed to sing through his muscles, so she remained quiet. He must be nervous about the Borats. For some reason, all she could picture was a giant sewer rat when she thought of the Borats. Glancing at the man next to her, she grinned. I'm sure he can take them. When they reached the end of the hall, he hit a button on the wall, and a door slid open into a small silver room, a room that looked like an elevator. She followed Seer in, and the door closed behind them. The elevator plummeted, and her feet briefly left the floor. She screamed and grabbed Seer around the waist. Her stomach flipped, and her head felt as if her brain was shifting around in her skull.
What is it?
He asked, gathering her close. Too fast, too bright, too small. I'm going to die. A second later, the elevator stopped and the doors opened. She didn't move, too afraid her trembling legs might collapse from beneath her. The plummeting elevator was terrifying, but what worried her more was the anxiety that had so quickly swept her under. I'm not cured yet.
Kaci?
If I tell him now, he'll make me go back. I'm fine. Putting a hand under her chin, he forced her to look up at him.
Are you certain?
Yes, she said, trying to sound confident. Elevators simply don't move as fast on Earth. It surprised me is all.
If you are sure.
He didn't sound the least bit convinced. I am. She tried to step back, but in one quick motion, he bent slightly and hoisted her into his arms. She let out a squeak of alarm and pushed at his arms, almost forcing him to drop her. I can walk.
You are my patient.
He started forward.
If you weren't so captivating, so convincing, you would be in your healing bed right now. But you are, so So I will carry you and allow you to learn what you need in order to rest and relax into your new life.
She ran a finger along his jawline, unable to help herself. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself more than me. He's going to kiss me. She held her breath.
Medic Seer.
Someone greeted. He jerked, quickly looking away from her.
Gallant, how fares your new bride?
She turned to see a handsome man with short, dark hair striding towards them. One side of his lips quirked up.
My bride is fiery, passionate, impossible, and she is perfect.
Seer laughed.
I am glad. So you've won her heart?
His smile faded.
Not yet, but I will. Then, his gaze moved to her. Who is this?
Seer's grip tightened around her.
This is Kaci, my patient.
Ah, Parsimon's bride.
Yes.
Was it her imagination, or did the word hold an edge of anger?
She is pretty, too thin, too small, and her skin and hair are unusually light, but
She is beautiful, and she is a person who can hear you.
Now there was no mistaking it. Her doctor was angry. For some reason, his quick defense of her warmed her heart.
apologies.
Gallant said, giving her a short bow.
My bride's beauty has confounded me. I forgot my manners.
No problem, she replied, unsure what else to say.
Where are you headed?
Kaci wishes to see how the other females are faring. Actually, could you bring a handful of the females to viewing room 5?
Gallant frowned.
Why does she need a viewing room?
He hesitated.
She is currently being treated for the rewire contagion.
The other man practically jumped back from her.
She should be in quarantine. What in the pregnant mother's name are you doing bringing her out here?
Seer's tone was clipped.
Kaci has been around the other females her entire life, and yet no one else is sick. I therefore have to conclude that the virus isn't nearly as contagious or as dangerous to human females. Additionally, she has been given a full dose of the cure. In 95% of cases, the patient doesn't require more than one.
Gallant nodded, but the skeptical expression didn't leave his face.
Still,
That's why I requested the viewing room, my friend. I am taking no chances. Can you do as I ask?
After a moment, the man nodded, reluctance in the way he frowned. As you wish. And, Kaci added, if I could see Catalina, Athena, Clarissa, or Zoe, that would be great. They were women who, flew in my squad with me.
did you say Catalina?
His expression was guarded.
Yes, do you?
His frown deepened, and he turned away, speaking over his shoulder.
I will see what I can do.
Farther down the hall, they turned into a small room. Seer placed her on a row of chairs facing another room separated by glass. A short time later, the door to the room they looked into slid open. Athena strode confidently in. She wore a massive, ill-fitting dress similar to the one Kaci wore. It was a yellow that seemed comical on the serious woman, with dark eyes and dark hair styled into a bob that made the harsh lines of her face seem even harsher. Her brows rose as she spotted Kaci. Clarissa came in next, her rounded face puffy, her hazel eyes streaked with red. The curves of her body looked strange, crammed into a green dress that was both too tight and too long. The younger woman's gaze swung to her.
Kaci,
She raced to the glass and pressed her palms into it, her eyes filling with tears.
you made it.
Kaci rose and touched her own palms to the glass, feeling uncertain. Even though she and Clarissa had been in a squad together, her illness had driven a firm line between them. And what was more, it was difficult to get to know a woman who always seemed on the edge of a breakdown. "Are you okay?" Kaci asked. "Has anyone hurt you?" She started to sob, babbling at the same time in a high-pitched voice. Kaci stared, unable to make out any of her explanation. Looking at Athena, she pleaded for help with her eyes.
No one has hurt us.
Athena said with a sigh.
We've been sitting in a cell, waiting to be fed like good little prisoners each day. Oh, but they're nice enough to let a group of us leave for meals once a day in a common area. So there's that. And of course, waiting to be sold off to whatever perverted aliens bought us.
Seer made a sound in the back of his throat behind her.
We are not perverts.
Athena's dark eyes fixed on Seer, shooting daggers.
And what do you call buying us as whores?
Bride,
He corrected, looking confused.
not whores.
Oh, that's right.
She exclaimed sarcastically.
Creepy aliens kidnapped us to give to other creepy aliens who paid for us. And what? They aren't going to want to have sex with us?
He frowned.
Well, of course they will, but
Clarissa's sobbing grew harder. Athena waved her hands in the air, lips curling.
Sorry, alien man, but no one is going to fucking buy me, or pay to fuck me. Because if he tries it, I promise he'll regret it. All of you will.
Seer looked affronted.
no one is going to pay to have sex with you. You are a bride. Kaci's heart raced and she put her hand on Seer's arm to silence him. We should try to talk to Seer's people, to explain why kidnapping us for brides is wrong. Maybe they'll take us back home.
The dark-haired woman shook her head.
Don't be naive. We were tricked into becoming sex slaves. Better face it, once we reach our buyers, life's going to get a hell of a lot worse.
Gallant stuck his head into the room.
Females, I must return to my bride. Your visit needs to end.
Athena flipped him off, causing both Gallant and Seer to stare at her in confusion, then moved closer to the glass.
We need to get out of here, fast.
Their gazes held, and Kaci understood her unspoken words. You need to get us out of here. Fast. Where's Catalina? Kaci asked, her voice barely a whisper. Athena turned angry eyes on Seer's friend.
One of the aliens took her. She didn't want to go, and we hear her screaming every day. God only knows what he's doing to her.
Catalina, my brave friend, who killed to protect her little sister, who became our squad leader because of her intelligence and spirit, is screaming? What could make a woman like that scream? The most logical answer made her sick. Who took her? Kaci asked in a whisper. Athena pointed at Gallant. Kaci's stomach dropped as she turned to the large man who regarded her with cold eyes. I want to see Catalina.
No.
He practically snarled. Yes! Now! Kaci spun to face Seer. Take me to her! Gallant growled.
I will not expose my female to...
Enough!
Seer said, his expression guarded.
Kaci, I'm sorry, but you can't see your friend.
Kaci turned back to Athena. Where is she? Athena pointed to the right.
Third door down.
She paused.
We saw her when we were passing his room one day and he was leaving. She was in handcuffs.
Handcuffs? Ice ran through her blood. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched the two men exchange a look. Are we actually safe here? Who has her? Has he hurt her? I need to find out. Seer circled around the chairs and placed his hands on her shoulders.
We can discuss this later. We should return to the med bay.
What if I never get this chance again? What if now that I suspect what is going on, he doesn't let me out? Internally, she apologized to Seer, then shoved him with all her might. He let out a sound of surprise before tumbling backward over the chairs. Turning, she sprinted for the door, which opened at her approach. Her feet pounded down the hall as she ran to the third room. Behind her, she heard Gallant shout. At the door, she slammed the button, heart pounding in her ears. But nothing happened. Catalina! Catalina! She screamed. A second later, she heard someone pounding on the door and a frantic voice from the other side. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew it was her friend. Suddenly, Gallant grabbed her around the waist and pulled her away. She struggled, kicking behind her. Let me go, asshole! A few blows landed, but he didn't seem to notice. Catalina! Damn it, no! She struggled even harder, thrashing like a wild animal, but his grip on her was like steel. Suddenly she was ripped from Gallant. She barely had time to realize what had happened when Seer pulled her behind his back. A snarl sounded in the oddly silent hall. Her heart thudded wildly. The sound seemed to come from Seer. Gripping onto his tan vest, she bit back a scream as his markings spread, the darkness washing out most of his skin. He crouched slightly in front of her, his stance wide, like an animal challenging another. What? His friend took 2 steps back.
I wasn't trying to hurt her, just to protect my mate.
Seer growled, a low sound that made every hair on her body stand on end. Gallant's dark eyes widened, then he growled in return, his own markings darkening.
You're shifting. Control yourself before someone gets hurt.
Kaci took a step backward, looking from one to the other. What's happening here? What is shifting? Seer's snarl, and now she was sure it was him, echoed off the metallic walls of the ship and sent a chill down her spine.
Get him out of here, or no one will be safe.
The edge of rage in Gallant's voice made Kaci's fear jump several notches. Seer's eyes flew to her, and her heart stopped. They were entirely silver. But she stepped back from both of them, shaking her head.
He's not going to hurt you.
Gallant snapped.
But you're about to see what it looks like when 2 shadow walkers fight. And trust me, I'd rather not gut my friend.
Seer growled, his silver gaze sliding from both of them. I don't know what's happening, but it needs to end. Seer, she whispered his name. I'm scared. Can we go back to your room? His head jerked up and he tentatively rose from his crouch. When he reached for her, she swallowed her terror and took his hand. Seer snarled once more at Gallant, then backed them toward the elevator. The short trip back to the med bay left her in a cold sweat. When the door closed behind her, she tugged her hand free of his grip and wrapped her good arm around his neck. Seer, are you all right? His soft growl came from right behind her.
As long as you are.
I'm fine, she reassured him, even though she didn't feel the least bit fine. Cautiously, she slid slowly away from him, leaning awkwardly on the healing bed. Then she watched him, not sure what he would do next. To her relief, his markings slowly retracted and his eerie eyes without pupils returned to normal. But then he was standing in front of her, looking every bit as normal as always.
Kaci,
He sounded out of breath.
I'm sorry,
What was that? She asked on the verge of tears. What are you?
It was my primal side, the shadow walker within me. I was trying to protect you.
He reached for her, but when she flinched, he dropped his hand.
I would never hurt you.
Maybe he wouldn't. But what about the thing he was changing into? It seemed more like a monster. I still want to see Catalina, she whispered, to make sure he hasn't hurt her. Has Gallant changed into that thing with her?
Gallant has been shifting since he was 13. He has a lot more control, and he would never hurt his bride.
Humans just don't scream and cry for no reason.
I don't know why she's screaming and yelling, but Gallant is a good man. He wouldn't hurt her.
What about the handcuffs? Seer sighed.
If he handcuffed her, it must have been for her own safety.
If only I could believe that. She felt it then, her anxiety rising. Sweat trickled down her back as her head pounded. She's going to die. He's hurting her. All because I forgot about her. Stop! She screamed into her mind. Her thoughts calmed. I'm getting sick again. A moment later, the door to the med bay opened. Gallant entered, his gaze locked on Seer. Without thinking, she stood, watching as Seer crossed the room and stopped just feet in front of his friend. Are they going to fight again?
What are you doing here?
Seer asked, his tone curt. Gallant spoke as if he didn't hear him.
If you're starting to change, you need to talk to someone. It can be dangerous in the beginning, at least until you learn to control it.
He reached out and grasped his friend's arm.
Maybe she shouldn't be with...
She's fine with me.
Seer said, his tone clipped. And I'm fine, because you're the last person who will lay a hand on her while she's in my care. He jerked his arm out of his friend's grip, then reached back for Kaci. She stayed out of his reach, even when she saw the hurt in his eyes. This shows how little I know about them. Gallant turned to her.
Catalina is fine.
He promised.
No male would ever hurt a female, especially his chosen mate.
She swallowed around the lump in her throat. Maybe you see us as your mates, but to us, you're still just aliens that kidnapped us. I wonder how long your men will be patient when they realize we won't just go along with it. She held her shoulders high as she spun and hurried to the bedroom. As much as she wanted to talk to Seer, she needed to clear her head first. She'd learned so much in such a short period of time, it felt as if her already confusing situation had just become frighteningly real. I need to come up with a plan. I'm such a fool. I kidded myself that because of my attraction to Seer and the cure for the virus, that being kidnapped by aliens was a good thing, that it had brought me the life I'd always wanted and maybe even happiness. Turns out I've been kidnapped by monsters.